The courtroom was packed wall to wall, with spectators, journalists, and curious onlookers who had come to witness what the local news was calling the trial of the decade. Geneva stood at the defendant's table, wearing a dress 2 sizes too big, borrowed that morning from the public defender's closet because she couldn't afford anything better. Her hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the wooden table, her knuckles turning white from the pressure. The judge hadn't even called the case to order yet, but her stepmother Claudette was already performing for the cameras like a seasoned actress at an awards show. Claudette sat in the front row, dressed entirely in black, wearing a custom mourning suit that probably cost more than Geneva's entire legal defense fund. Her face was painted with theatrical grief, complete with perfectly timed dabs at dry eyes using a silk handkerchief, while photographers captured every calculated angle. The woman was a master manipulator, and she had convinced nearly everyone in that room that she was the victim. Geneva's public defender, an overworked man named Mr. Langston, who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, sat beside her shuffling papers without much enthusiasm. Claudette's lawyer stood up before anyone had given him permission to speak, his voice booming through the courtroom with practiced authority. He addressed the judge directly, gesturing dramatically toward his client. "Your Honor, my client has suffered unimaginable loss. Her beloved husband, Geneva's father Raymond, died under what we believe to be highly suspicious circumstances, and now we have substantial evidence suggesting that his own daughter may have been directly involved in his untimely death." The words hit Geneva like physical blows. The room erupted in gasps and shocked murmurs as people turned to stare at her with disgust. Geneva wanted to scream, to tell every single person the truth about who Claudette really was. But her lawyer put a warning hand on her shoulder and whispered harshly, "Not yet." The judge, an older black man with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, banged his gavel twice to restore order. "We will proceed with opening statements," he announced firmly. But before Claudette's lawyer could take another step forward, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom suddenly slammed open with such force that they crashed against the walls. Every head in the room turned in unison to see who had made such a dramatic entrance. A tall black man walked in, with the kind of confidence that made people instinctively move out of his way. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, flanked by 2 serious-looking attorneys carrying briefcases that appeared heavy with documents. His shoes clicked against the marble floor with steady, purposeful rhythm as he strode down the center aisle. Geneva had never seen this man before in her life, but something about the way he carried himself made her heart skip. Claudette's face suddenly drained of all color, as if she had seen a ghost. The lead prosecutor stood up abruptly, confusion evident on his face. "Your Honor, who is this person? This is highly irregular." The stranger stopped at the center of the courtroom aisle, his commanding presence filling the entire space. He turned to face the judge with absolute composure, showing no signs of nervousness despite interrupting official proceedings. "My name is Donovan Pierce," he announced, his deep voice resonating through the room. "I am the founder and director of the Pierce Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to investigating cases of elder abuse, fraud, and financial exploitation. We have been actively investigating this case for the past 4 months, and I am here today to ensure that justice is properly served." The courtroom erupted into chaos, with reporters frantically typing and spectators whispering excitedly. Claudette's lawyer looked completely blindsided, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. The judge leaned forward, intrigued. "Mr. Pierce, on what grounds are you claiming standing in this matter?" To understand how Geneva had ended up in this impossible situation, accused of murdering the father she loved, More than anything in the world, one had to go back to the beginning of her story. Geneva had never known luxury or comfort growing up. Her entire childhood had been built on the bent and weary back of her father Raymond, a hard-working man who had juggled 3 jobs simultaneously to keep food on their table after Geneva's mother died of cancer when Geneva was only 6 years old. Raymond worked as a maintenance supervisor at the county hospital during the day, drove a delivery truck on weekends to make extra money, and fixed cars in their small garage at night for neighbors who couldn't afford proper mechanics. He never complained, not even once. Despite the exhaustion that lined his face, Geneva remembered falling asleep countless nights to the sound of wrenches clinking in the driveway and her father humming old gospel hymns while he worked under flickering fluorescent lights. She would wake up in the morning to find him asleep on their worn couch, still wearing his grease-stained work boots because he had been too tired to make it to his bedroom. But no matter how exhausted he was, Raymond always woke up with a smile. Raymond would pour instant coffee into his chipped favorite mug every morning and tell Geneva, "You're gonna do better than me, baby girl. You're gonna finish school and make something real of yourself." And Geneva had tried with everything in her to make that dream come true. She studied every single night at their small kitchen table, even during the times when they couldn't pay the electric bill, and she had to do her homework by candlelight. She graduated high school with honors, despite working part-time at a grocery store to help with expenses, and she earned a partial scholarship to the local community college. Her father had cried openly at her graduation ceremony, one of only 3 parents who had shown up that day. That was when Claudette had appeared in their lives, like a beautiful snake slithering into paradise. Geneva was 19 at the time, working part-time and taking night classes. Raymond met Claudette at the hospital where he worked. She was a nurse there, beautiful and polished, and always smiling. She would bring Raymond lunch during his shifts, laugh at all his jokes, and she told Geneva repeatedly that she reminded her of the daughter she had never been blessed with. Geneva had wanted so desperately to believe that Claudette was genuine, that this woman truly cared about her father and wanted to be part of their small family. The wedding had been small and simple, just a quick courthouse ceremony, followed by dinner at a local diner. Claudette moved into their modest 3-bedroom house, the same house that Raymond had finally paid off after 20 long years of mortgage payments. Claudette said she wanted to help out and ease Raymond's burden, and at first her presence seemed genuinely positive. She cooked dinner most nights, helped Geneva fill out scholarship applications, and even offered to pay for Geneva's textbooks one semester when money was particularly tight. But there were small things, little red flags that Geneva noticed, but ignored because she wanted her father to be happy. Claudette would consistently forget to save Geneva a plate of food when Geneva worked late shifts. She made comments about Geneva's weight, her clothes, her hair, always delivered with a sweet smile, and followed by, "I'm just trying to help you, sweetheart." The red flags became harder to ignore when Claudette convinced Raymond to add her name to the house deed. "Just in case something happens to you, honey." Raymond had brushed off Geneva's concerns. "She's my wife, baby girl. It's just paperwork." But Geneva had felt it deep in her gut, a cold knowing that something was fundamentally wrong. The real breaking point came during Geneva's junior year of college, when Raymond started getting sick. It began with simple fatigue, then progressed to chest pains and dizziness. He went to see a doctor, someone Geneva had never heard of before, who told him it was just stress and prescribed rest and some supplements. But Raymond kept getting worse with each passing week, his skin taking on a grayish pallor. Geneva begged him to get a second opinion, But Claudette always intervened, insisting that the doctor knew what he was doing. "He just needs to take his pills and relax," Claudette would say, patting Raymond's hand like he was a confused child. Geneva noticed the pills that appeared in their bathroom cabinet, small white tablets in unmarked bottles that Claudette brought home and claimed were supplements to boost his energy. Raymond took them religiously every single day because his wife was a nurse and he trusted her medical judgment completely. And every single day, he grew weaker and more disoriented. Geneva tried multiple times to talk to her father privately, but Claudette was always there, always hovering and inserting herself into every conversation. When Geneva finally managed to pull her father aside late one night, he looked at her with exhausted, bloodshot eyes. "Don't start trouble, Geneva. Claudette has been good to me, good to us." 3 months after the mysterious pills appeared, Raymond collapsed at work in the middle of his shift. He was rushed to the emergency room of the very hospital where he had worked for 15 years. Geneva got the frantic phone call during her anatomy class, and she ran 6 blocks to the hospital, with her backpack still on, and her heart hammering violently. Claudette was already at the hospital when Geneva arrived, standing in the sterile hallway crying dramatically into the shoulder of a doctor Geneva had never seen before. Geneva pushed past them both and burst into her father's room. Raymond was lying on a hospital bed, connected to a ventilator, his skin an awful gray color, monitors beeping in rhythms that sounded like countdowns. Geneva grabbed his rough, work-worn hand. "Daddy, I'm here. I'm right here." His eyes fluttered open for just a brief second, and he looked at her, really looked at her, and tried to smile. Then he squeezed her hand, with such faint pressure she almost missed it. And then all the monitors began screaming at once. Doctors and nurses rushed in, pushing Geneva aside, as they tried desperately to save him. But it was too late. Raymond Eugene Raymond was pronounced dead at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night. The official cause of death was sudden cardiac arrest. Geneva collapsed into a chair, completely numb, unable to process that the man who had given her everything was just gone. Claudette stood in the doorway with an expression Geneva would never forget. Her tears had dried up completely, and there was a small, cold smile playing at the corners of her mouth when she thought no one was looking. The funeral was held 3 days later at the church where Raymond had been a faithful deacon for over 10 years. Geneva moved through the service like a ghost, mechanically greeting relatives and accepting condolences from neighbors who told her what a good man her father had been. But Claudette was absolutely the star of the show, wearing an elaborate black lace dress and a dramatic wide-brimmed hat, holding court at the reception like she was the leading lady in some tragic theatrical production. She thanked every single person for coming, talked eloquently about Raymond's legacy, and made absolutely certain that everyone present knew she had been dutifully by his side until the very end. Geneva stood silently in the corner, watching this performance with growing rage and helplessness. She wanted to scream at all these people, wanted to tell them that something was terribly wrong, that her father had been perfectly healthy before Claudette's mysterious pills appeared. But she had no proof, nothing but a gut feeling and a grieving daughter's suspicions that no one would take seriously. When the lawyer read Raymond's will 2 weeks later, Geneva realized just how deep Claudette's betrayal truly was. The reading took place in Mr. Hutchins' office, a small space that smelled like old leather and stale coffee. Geneva sat in an uncomfortable chair while the lawyer shuffled through papers. Claudette sat across from her, with her legs elegantly crossed, her expression serene and almost bored. Mr. Hutchins cleared his throat. "To my beloved wife Claudette, I leave the house located at 1247 Maple Street, along with all furnishings, vehicles, and personal property contained within. Geneva's stomach dropped. Mr. Hutchins continued without pausing. To my beloved wife, Claudette, I also leave the entirety of my savings account, my pension fund, and my life insurance policy in the amount of $150,000. Geneva couldn't breathe. Now she stared at Claudette, whose face remained completely calm. What about me? Geneva finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Mr. Hutchins looked up with tired eyes. There is a provision for you, Miss Raymond. Your father left you his tool set from the garage and his personal Bible. The silence was deafening. Geneva sat there waiting for someone to laugh, waiting for this to be revealed as some cruel joke. But Mr. Hutchins just looked back at her with the same neutral expression. That's it? Geneva whispered, unable to believe what she was hearing. Geneva turned to face Claudette directly. You did this. You changed his will. Claudette tilted her head slightly, her voice dripping with false sweetness. I did nothing but love your father with all my heart, Geneva. He made his own choices about how to distribute his assets. Maybe if you had been around more, instead of always being at school and work, he would have felt differently. The accusation was like a slap. I was at school because he wanted me there. He worked 3 jobs so I could get an education. Claudette's smile didn't waver. And yet, when he was dying in that hospital, where were you? I was the one who took care of him day and night. I earned every single thing he left me. Geneva stood up so fast that her chair toppled backward. You poisoned him. You gave him pills that weren't prescribed by any real doctor, and you killed him. Mr. Hutchins looked alarmed. Miss Raymond, that is an extremely serious accusation. Geneva's voice shook. She gave him pills from unmarked bottles. He got sicker every single day after she moved in and started giving him those supplements. Claudette stood up slowly, smoothing down her expensive skirt. My husband had a serious heart condition. The doctors confirmed this. If you're suggesting I had anything to do with his unfortunate death, then you had better have solid proof. Geneva felt like the floor was tilting. I'll get proof. I'll find it. Claudette's smile turned ice cold. Then by all means, get your proof. But until you can produce evidence, you have exactly 2 weeks to move out of my house. Geneva's heart stopped. Move out, Claudette said matter-of-factly. It's my property now. And quite frankly, I don't want you living there anymore. Geneva spent the next 2 weeks in hell. She tore apart the house looking for those pills, but they had completely vanished. The bathroom cabinet was empty and scrubbed clean, smelling of bleach. She called the hospital trying to get her father's medical records, but they told her only next of kin could access them, and Claudette was listed as primary. Geneva tried to file a police report, sitting in a depressing gray waiting room for over 3 hours, until a tired officer finally took her statement. He listened while taking notes, but his expression made it clear he didn't believe her. Do you have any physical evidence of foul play, miss? He asked. Not yet. But if you investigate, he held up his hand. Then I'm very sorry. But there's nothing we can do. People die of heart attacks every single day. I'm truly sorry for your loss. Geneva moved out of the only home she had ever known. On a rainy Thursday afternoon, everything she owned, fitting into just 4 garbage bags and a duffel bag. Claudette stood on the front porch, watching with obvious satisfaction as Geneva loaded her pathetic belongings into her friend Talia's car. You could have been smart about all of this, Claudette called out. You could have kept your mouth shut and stayed in my good graces. Geneva turned to face her stepmother one final time, rain dripping down her face and mixing with tears. Why did you do it? Why did you kill him? Claudette's smile was sharp and cruel, and completely honest for the first time. Because your father was worth significantly more dead than alive. And because I could. Geneva spent the next 3 months merely surviving. She was forced to drop out of college because she couldn't afford tuition. She worked 2 jobs, waitressing during the day and cleaning office buildings at night. And she slept on her friend Talia's couch, spending every spare moment desperately searching for evidence. She tracked down the doctor who had prescribed Raymond's supposed heart medication, a man named Dr. Bernard Shaw, who worked at a rundown clinic. She learned that he had been disciplined twice by the medical board for questionable practices. Geneva waited in his lobby for 4 hours until Dr. Shaw finally agreed to talk to her. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said dismissively. "You prescribed medication to my father." Medication that killed him. Dr. Shaw's jaw tightened. "Your father had a pre-existing heart condition?" Geneva slammed her hands on his desk. "He didn't have a heart condition until my stepmother started giving him those pills." "Did she pay you? Did Claudette pay you to falsify his medical records?" Dr. Shaw stood up abruptly. "You need to leave my office immediately." But Geneva saw it, a flicker of guilt in his eyes. She just couldn't prove any of it. Then Claudette made her boldest move yet. 6 months after Raymond's death, Geneva received official court documents via certified mail. She opened the envelope in Talia's tiny kitchen, her hands shaking as she read the legal complaint. It was a wrongful death lawsuit filed by Claudette against Geneva, claiming that Geneva had contributed to Raymond's death by causing him extreme and ongoing emotional distress through her reckless behavior and constant conflict. The lawsuit sought damages of $500,000. Geneva dropped the papers on the kitchen table. Talia read over her shoulder and gasped. She can't be serious. She can't actually think she'll win this. But Geneva understood immediately what Claudette was really doing. She didn't need to win. She just needed to destroy Geneva's reputation so completely that no one would ever believe Geneva's accusations. The case went public within days, picked up by local news stations. The headlines were brutal. Daughter accused in father's death. Claudette gave carefully staged interviews on television, crying on camera about how Raymond had been torn apart emotionally by Geneva's selfishness. Geneva couldn't get a job anywhere. She couldn't show her face in public without people whispering. Even her father's relatives started avoiding her calls. The church where Raymond had faithfully served as a deacon held a special service. The pastor had apparently preached about family loyalty and honoring our elders and the pain of being betrayed by those we love most. Everyone in that congregation knew exactly who he was talking about. Claudette had sat in the front pew throughout the entire service, nodding along and dabbing at her eyes. Geneva's preliminary court hearing was scheduled for a Wednesday morning. She couldn't afford to hire a real lawyer, so the court assigned her an overworked public defender named Mr. Langston. He met with Geneva exactly once for 15 minutes, asked her a handful of basic questions while barely listening, then told her to just be honest on the witness stand and everything will work out. Geneva knew with absolute certainty that she was doomed. The night before the hearing, she sat alone in Talia's dark living room, staring at the ceiling. "What if I just run away?" she whispered. "And go where exactly?" Talia asked gently. "You didn't do anything wrong. The truth has to come out eventually." But Geneva had stopped believing in truth or justice. She went to bed that night, fully expecting to lose everything. She had no idea that the next morning, a man she had never met would walk into that courtroom and change her life forever. Now, Donovan Pierce stood before the judge with absolute confidence his legal team spreading documents across the defense table like they were preparing for battle. His lead attorney, a sharp woman named Ms. Carver, stood and addressed the courtroom with clear authority. Your Honor, over the past 4 months, the Pierce Foundation's investigative team has conducted an exhaustive independent investigation into the death of Raymond Eugene Raymond. What we discovered was not a grieving widow, but rather a calculated predator who deliberately targeted a vulnerable man for financial gain. Claudette's lawyer objected loudly. Your Honor, this is supposed to be a civil hearing, not a criminal trial. Ms. Carver cut him off smoothly. Then perhaps we should make it a criminal trial, because we have evidence of fraud, forgery, and murder. The courtroom exploded. The judge banged his gavel repeatedly to restore order. Ms. Carver opened her briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of documents. We have medical records obtained through legal subpoena showing that Mr. Raymond had absolutely no history of heart disease, high blood pressure, or any cardiac issues whatsoever prior to his marriage to the defendant. She placed the first document on the overhead projector, and Raymond's medical history appeared on the screen. Geneva's breath caught as she saw pages she had never been able to access, records showing completely normal EKGs, healthy cholesterol levels, no indication of any heart problems. Ms. Carver continued. We also have pharmacy records showing that Mrs. Claudette Raymond filled multiple prescriptions for digoxin, which is a powerful heart medication, under her husband's name, despite the fact that no licensed cardiologist ever prescribed this medication to him. Another document appeared showing pharmacy receipts with Claudette's signature. Geneva felt tears streaming down her face. Digoxin is a medication that, when administered incorrectly or in excessive doses to a patient who doesn't actually need it, can cause fatal cardiac arrhythmia and sudden death, Ms. Carver explained, especially in patients who have no underlying heart condition. Claudette's lawyer was sweating now. Mrs. Raymond is a trained nurse. She was simply helping manage her husband's health care. Donovan stepped forward. Mrs. Claudette Raymond's nursing license was permanently suspended by the state board in 2019 for falsifying patient records at 2 separate hospitals and stealing controlled substances. The courtroom erupted again. Geneva stared at Claudette in shock. She had never known about the suspended license. Ms. Carver handed another document to the bailiff. This is public record, Your Honor. Mrs. Raymond lost her license after being caught altering medication logs and stealing prescription drugs. She was unemployed and deeply in debt when she met Raymond Eugene Raymond, and she saw him as an opportunity. Donovan continued. We also obtained financial records showing that Mrs. Raymond took out 3 credit cards in her husband's name during the months before his death without his knowledge. She maxed out all 3 cards, accumulating over $70,000 in charges for luxury goods, spa treatments, jewelry, and cash advances. Geneva covered her mouth in horror. Her father had always been so careful with money. Donovan wasn't finished. And most damning of all, we have sworn testimony from Dr. Bernard Shaw, who has admitted under oath that Mrs. Claudette Raymond paid him $5,000 in cash to falsify her husband's medical records and list cause of death as natural cardiac arrest. The judge's eyes widened. You have Dr. Shaw's testimony? Ms. Carver nodded. We do, Your Honor. He's currently in custody and has agreed to testify in exchange for a reduced sentence. He's waiting outside right now. The judge looked at Claudette, whose face had gone from red to pale. Bailiff, bring in Dr. Shaw. Dr. Shaw walked in, flanked by 2 officers. He looked broken, nothing like the arrogant man Geneva had confronted months ago. He took the witness stand and was sworn in. his hand shaking. Ms. Carver approached him. "Dr. Shaw, please tell the court about your interactions with Mrs. Claudette Raymond." Dr. Shaw's voice was barely audible. "She came to my office about 8 months before her husband died. She said she needed my help with a situation. She offered me money to prescribe digoxin under her husband's name and to falsify his medical records to show a history of heart disease." The courtroom was completely silent. Dr. Shaw continued, "She told me exactly how much to prescribe. She said she would administer it herself, since she used to be a nurse. She paid me $5,000 in cash." Claudette suddenly stood up, screaming, "He's lying. This is all lies. Geneva put him up to this." The judge's voice was like thunder. "Mrs. Raymond, sit down immediately, or I will have you removed." But Claudette was beyond reason now, her careful mask completely shattered. She turned to face Geneva directly, her face twisted with hatred. "You ungrateful little bitch. I gave you everything. I gave you a mother when you had nothing." Geneva stood up too, her voice breaking. "You murdered my father. You poisoned him for his life insurance money." Claudette laughed, a high and brittle sound that sent chills down everyone's spine. "Your father was a broke, pathetic man who worked himself to death for nothing. I just sped up the process and made sure I got paid for putting up with him." The entire courtroom gasped in collective shock. Even Claudette's own lawyer looked horrified. The judge leaned back, his expression ice cold. "Mrs. Raymond, I strongly suggest you retain criminal defense counsel immediately. Bailiff, please take Mrs. Claudette Raymond into custody on suspicion of first-degree murder, fraud, and forgery." 2 officers moved toward Claudette, who began screaming and fighting as they tried to handcuff her. "You can't do this to me. I have rights." She struggled violently as they dragged her toward the door, screaming obscenities and threats. Reporters swarmed toward the exits. Geneva stood frozen, unable to process what had just happened. The nightmare that had consumed her life for 8 months was finally over. Donovan walked over and crouched down, so he was at eye level with her. "It's over, Geneva. She can't hurt you anymore." Geneva looked at this man, who had appeared like an angel, and saved her. "Why?" she whispered through her tears. "Why did you help me when you don't even know me?" For a moment, something raw and painful flashed across Donovan's face. "Because someone should have helped my mother when she needed it," he said quietly. "And no one did. I started the Pierce Foundation so that people like you wouldn't have to fight alone." The hearing ended with all charges against Geneva completely dismissed and Claudette formally charged with murder. Over the following weeks, Donovan's team systematically dismantled every lie that Claudette had constructed. They recovered money she had stolen from Raymond's accounts. They found the forged will, a forgery so obvious that experts were shocked anyone had believed it. The real will, properly signed and notarized 2 years before Raymond's death, left absolutely everything to Geneva. The house on Maple Street, the life insurance policy, the savings account, all of it rightfully belonged to Geneva. The criminal trial lasted 3 months. Claudette's defense team tried every strategy. They claimed she had been coerced, that she had genuinely loved Raymond, that the medications were an honest mistake. But the evidence was overwhelming. Dr. Shaw testified in detail about the cash payments and the falsified records. A handwriting expert, confirmed the will had been forged. A forensic accountant traced every dollar Claudette had stolen. And the digoxin pills, the unmarked bottles that had slowly poisoned Raymond, were recovered from a storage unit that Claudette had rented under a fake name. The jury deliberated for only 4 hours. Geneva sat in the courtroom, with her hands clasped tightly. Donovan sat beside her, steady and calm. When the verdict was read aloud, Geneva closed her eyes. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Claudette Marie Raymond, guilty on all counts." The courtroom erupted in applause. Geneva sobbed, not from joy, but from profound relief. The weight of 8 months of hell was finally lifting. Claudette was sentenced to 30 years in prison, with no possibility of parole. The judge's voice was cold and devoid of sympathy. "You deliberately betrayed the trust of a good man who loved you. You systematically poisoned him for financial gain. You stole from his daughter and attempted to destroy her life to cover your crimes. You will spend the rest of your productive years thinking about what you have done." Claudette didn't cry or show any remorse. She simply stared straight ahead, with a blank expression as the officers led her away. Geneva never saw her again, and had no desire to. 6 months later, Geneva stood outside a small coffee shop downtown, waiting nervously. Donovan had called that morning and asked if she wanted to meet. She had immediately agreed, even though part of her still didn't fully understand why this wealthy man had dedicated so much time to saving her. Donovan arrived exactly on time, dressed casually in jeans and a black shirt. "Hey," he said, smiling warmly. "Hey," Geneva replied, suddenly feeling awkward. "Thanks for meeting me. I know I've said it 100 times, but I still don't know how to properly thank you." Donovan held up his hand gently. "You really don't have to keep thanking me, Geneva. What I did was just basic human decency and justice." They went inside and ordered coffee, then sat by the large front window where afternoon sunlight poured in. Geneva wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I actually looked you up online after everything settled down," Geneva admitted. "I read about the Pierce Foundation and all the cases you've won. You've literally saved dozens of families. It's incredible work." Donovan nodded humbly. "I try my best to make a difference where I can." Geneva hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning in her mind. "But why do you do it? What made you start the foundation?" Donovan was quiet for a long time, staring down into his coffee cup. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and filled with old pain. "When I was 12 years old, my father died suddenly of a heart attack," Donovan began. "My mother was devastated. About a year later, she remarried a man named Carlton, who seemed kind at first, exactly what she needed. But he wasn't kind at all. He was a predator who saw a vulnerable widow with assets and insurance money." Geneva felt her heart clench, recognizing the awful parallels to her own story. Donovan continued, "Carlton systematically isolated my mother from her friends and family. He took complete control of all her finances and convinced her that she was useless without his guidance. When she finally tried to leave him after years of abuse, he had her declared mentally incompetent and got a judge to grant him full conservatorship. My mother spent the last 5 years of her life locked away in a nursing home, heavily medicated and alone, while Carlton spent all her money and lived in her house." Donovan's hands were trembling slightly. "I was in college when all of this was happening. I tried desperately to fight it, tried to hire lawyers, but I couldn't. I was just a broke college kid with no resources. By the time I finally made enough money to afford good lawyers and fight back properly, it was too late. My mother died alone." He looked up and met Geneva's eyes. "I started the Pierce Foundation so that no one else would have to go through what my mother experienced, what I experienced feeling powerless, so that people like Claudette and Carlton don't get away with destroying innocent lives." Geneva felt tears sliding down her face as she reached across to take Donovan's hand. I'm so incredibly sorry that happened to your mother. And to you. Donovan squeezed her hand gently. Don't be sorry. Just honor her memory by living the life you were meant to live. You survived something terrible, Geneva. And now, you get to decide who you become because of it. They talked for over 2 hours that afternoon, sharing stories about loss and justice and what it felt like to keep moving forward when the world had tried to crush you. And when Geneva finally stood to leave, Donovan walked her to her car. So, what are you going to do now with your life? He asked, with genuine interest. Geneva smiled, and it was a real smile that reached her eyes. I'm going back to college to finish my degree in social work. I want to help people the way you helped me. I want to be there for families who are going through impossible situations. Donovan's face lit up with approval. That's absolutely perfect, Geneva. You're going to change so many lives. Geneva hesitated, then added, and Donovan, when I graduate and get my credentials, if you ever need someone on your team at the foundation, please call me. I want to help with this work. Donovan's smile widened. That's a promise. I'll be calling you the day after graduation. 2 years passed, and Geneva walked across a graduation stage, wearing a cap and gown, with her hard-earned social work degree tucked proudly under her arm. The auditorium was packed. Talia cheered loudly from the third row, waving a homemade sign. Donovan sat beside Talia, clapping enthusiastically. Geneva laughed through happy tears, overwhelmed with gratitude. Her father would have been so incredibly proud, and somehow she felt like he was there in spirit, watching over her and celebrating this achievement. After the ceremony, Geneva stood outside, under large oak trees, taking photos with friends. Donovan approached, carrying a small gift bag. This is for you, he said warmly. Geneva opened it carefully and found a beautiful leather notebook with her initials embossed on the cover in gold. For your first cases, when you start working with a foundation, Donovan explained, you're going to help so many people, Geneva. Geneva hugged the notebook to her chest. I learned from the very best. Geneva got a job with a respected nonprofit helping survivors of domestic violence and financial abuse. She moved into a cozy apartment overlooking the river with a balcony where she could watch the sunrise. She planted flowers in colorful pots and adopted a sweet orange cat named Sunny. And every Sunday, without fail, Geneva visited her father's grave at the peaceful cemetery on the hill. She would bring fresh daisies, Raymond's favorite flowers, and sit on the grass beside his headstone and tell him about her week. She told him about the clients she had helped escape dangerous situations, about the families she had reunited, about the small victories. I did it, Daddy, she whispered one beautiful Sunday afternoon, with the sun warm on her shoulders. I made something real of myself, just like you always wanted. I'm helping people now, making a real difference. The wind rustled through the trees overhead, and for just a brief moment, Geneva could swear she heard her father's voice carried on that breeze. I'm so proud of you, baby girl. Claudette's first parole hearing came up 5 years into her sentence, and it was denied almost immediately. Geneva didn't attend because she had already given that woman enough of her time and energy. But Donovan attended and sent Geneva the transcript. Claudette had shown absolutely no remorse. She had blamed everyone except herself, the doctors, the lawyers, even Raymond for being too trusting. The parole board had deliberated for less than 10 minutes before denying her release. Maybe she'll eventually change, Talia suggested hopefully, when Geneva told her. Geneva shrugged philosophically. Maybe she will someday, but that's not my problem anymore. I've moved on. On the third anniversary of her father's death, Geneva hosted a beautiful memorial at the community center. She invited everyone who had truly known and loved Raymond, his co-workers, his church friends, his neighbors. She set up a table displaying photos of him smiling, working hard, living with dignity. She served all of his favorite comfort foods: fried chicken, collard greens, macaroni and cheese, and sweet potato pie. People stood up one by one and shared stories. They talked about the time Raymond fixed a stranger's car for free. They shared memories of how he donated his overtime pay to the church's food bank every Christmas. They remembered how he worked a double shift so a co-worker could attend his son's graduation. Geneva cried through every single story. But these were good tears, healing tears that washed away some of the pain. At the end of the memorial service, Geneva stood at the front of the room and raised a glass of sweet tea. "My father taught me through his actions that love isn't about what you have or what you can buy. Love is about what you're willing to give and sacrifice for the people you care about." He gave absolutely everything he had. And because of his example and his sacrifice, I know how to keep going, how to fight for what's right, and how to love others well. Everyone in the room raised their glasses high. "To Raymond," Geneva said, her voice strong and clear. "To Raymond." The entire room echoed back to her. Donovan's foundation continued to grow and expand its reach. With Geneva now on the team bringing her passion and lived experience, they helped dozens more families escape situations just like the one Geneva had survived. They exposed fraud, recovered stolen assets, put abusers behind bars, and gave hope to people who thought justice was only available to the wealthy and powerful. Geneva became known in legal circles as the woman who absolutely never gave up on her clients. Lawyers called her office regularly, asking for advice on similar cases. Desperate families reached out, begging her to take their cases and fight for them. And Geneva took on every single case she possibly could because she remembered exactly what it felt like to be powerless and alone, with no one willing to believe her or help her. One rainy afternoon, a young woman who looked barely 20 years old came into Geneva's office. She was terrified and shaking, clutching a folder of documents to her chest, like a lifeline. Her stepmother had stolen her entire inheritance after her father's sudden death. She had nowhere to go, no money, no support system. Geneva listened to the young woman's story with her full attention, and her heart broke and healed simultaneously because this story was so painfully familiar. "I'll help you," Geneva said firmly, reaching across her desk to take the young woman's trembling hand. "We're going to make this right and get you justice." The young woman started crying with relief. "But why would you help me? You don't even know me or anything about me." Geneva smiled gently, remembering asking Donovan that exact same question years ago. "Because someone helped me when I had absolutely nothing and nowhere to turn. And now, it's my turn to help you and others like you." 5 years after Claudette's trial, Geneva received an unexpected phone call from the prison. Claudette wanted to see her in person. Geneva's first instinct was to immediately refuse, to protect herself from any more of that woman's poison. But something deep inside her, maybe curiosity, maybe a need for final closure, made her agree to the visit. She drove to the state prison on a cold Saturday morning when the sky was heavy with clouds. The visiting room was depressing and sterile, smelling strongly of bleach and institutional sadness. Claudette walked in, wearing a faded orange jumpsuit, her once perfect hair now streaked with gray, her face lined with deep wrinkles and bitterness. They sat across from each other at a scarred metal table, in complete silence for a full minute, just staring at each other. "Why did you come here?" Claudette finally asked, her voice raspier than Geneva remembered. Geneva answered honestly, "I don't actually know. Maybe I needed to see you one last time, to remind myself that you're really gone from my life forever." Claudette laughed, but it was a bitter and hollow sound. "I thought maybe you'd come here to gloat about how you won, and I lost everything." Geneva shook her head slowly. "I don't need to gloat, Claudette. You lost everything all by yourself, through your own terrible choices. I didn't have to do anything except tell the truth." Claudette's face twisted with anger and resentment. "I could have had everything I ever wanted. I could have lived in comfort and luxury for the rest of my life, if you had just stayed out of the way and kept your mouth shut." Geneva interrupted her calmly. "You murdered my father in cold blood for insurance money. You never had a chance at getting away with it forever. Evil always loses eventually." Claudette leaned back in her plastic chair, her eyes still cold and calculating, even after years in prison. "You actually think you've won something? You think your little charity work and your college degrees make you better than me?" Geneva stood up from the table, ready to leave this place and this woman behind forever. "I don't think I'm better than you, Claudette. I just know that I'm free to live my life with purpose and meaning, and you never will be free again." She walked toward the exit door, then paused and turned back one final time. "I forgive you," Geneva said quietly, without any anger in her voice. "Not for your benefit, but for mine. Because I refuse to carry your poison and your hatred around with me anymore. You don't get to take up any more space in my heart or my mind." She walked out without looking back, even once. Behind her, Claudette shouted something angry and incoherent, but Geneva didn't hear the words. She was already gone, already free, already moving forward into her future. That evening, Geneva stood on her apartment balcony watching a beautiful sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Donovan that read, "Dinner tomorrow night. There's a new case I want to discuss with you and get your perspective on." She smiled and typed back quickly, "Absolutely. See you at 7. Below her balcony, the city hummed with life and energy. People were going home to their families after long days at work. Children were playing and laughing in the park across the street. A young couple walked hand in hand under the streetlights, lost in their own world. Geneva thought about her father and everything he had sacrificed to give her opportunities and a better life. She thought about the man who had worked himself to exhaustion without ever complaining, who had taught her through his actions that hard work mattered, that love was demonstrated through sacrifice, and that integrity couldn't be bought or stolen or faked. She thought about Claudette, rotting alone in a prison cell, consumed by bitterness and regret, having lost absolutely everything that mattered. And she thought about all the families she had helped since starting this work, desperate people who had been lied to and stolen from and betrayed by those they trusted most, people who had thought justice was only available to the wealthy and powerful until Geneva proved them wrong. She had learned something profound through all the pain and struggle, that revenge wasn't about making someone else suffer or watching your enemies fall. Real revenge was refusing to let evil define who you became. It was about taking the absolute worst thing that ever happened to you and somehow transforming it into purpose and meaning. Her father used to say something that Geneva had never fully understood until she lived through hell and came out the other side. "Baby girl, you can't control what people do to you or how they treat you. but you can absolutely control who you become because of it and how you respond. Geneva had become someone who fought fearlessly for the powerless and the forgotten, someone who turned personal pain into protection for vulnerable others, someone who proved that justice wasn't just for people with money and connections, someone her father would be incredibly proud of. And that was the best possible revenge, becoming someone that evil couldn't destroy. If this story touched your heart in any way, please take just a moment to subscribe to this channel and support this work. Hit that like button and share this video with someone in your life who needs to hear this message of hope and justice today. Tell me in the comments section below, have you or someone you love ever faced betrayal from someone you trusted completely? How did you find the strength and courage to keep going and fighting? I read every single comment personally, and your stories and experiences inspire me to keep sharing these important messages with the world. Remember this truth always. No matter how dark and deep the valley you're walking through right now, there is always a mountain waiting on the other side. You just have to keep climbing one step at a time. Keep believing that justice exists, and never let anyone steal the light that lives inside you. Until next time, stay strong in your convictions. Stay faithful to your truth. Keep fighting for what's right. And never, ever let anyone convince you that you don't deserve justice and dignity. God bless you all.